Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the National Association of Government Web Professionals' 17th Annual Conference. 17 years. We have another great conference planned for you this year. If this is your first time attending a NAGW conference, raise your hand. Yay! So those of you that are new, take some time to meet some new friends, because I can guarantee that there's somebody here that's either working on a similar project, using the same software, or struggling with a similar issue. So networking and making friends is really great. If this is not your first NAGW conference, take some time to meet some new friends too. We're all here to help each other, and this is one of the wonderful things about the organization, is all the networking that we do. So don't forget to complete session evaluations for all the sessions that you attend. In every session room, there's going to be table tents with a QR code. You can scan that or to get to the evaluation page, or you can go to nagwa.org/evaluations. There's an overall conference evaluation, and that's at the top, and then the session evaluations are organized alphabetically by day. There's a GroupMe group that we set up, and information on how to join the group was emailed out. You can either download an app on your device, or you can go to the groupme.com website. That's a great way to connect with your fellow NAGW peers. We also have a Snapchat filter that should be in effect now, and we also have a photo booth and a NAGW logo display, so we have some fun, cool web and tech-related sayings. So go take some fun photos and hashtag those NAGW 2019. So this is my fourth and final year as your president. I'm honored and privileged to have worked for this organization for the past 6 years. Thank you for making this organization so awesome. Being on the board of directors is a volunteer job, and there's always a lot of work to be done. As you know, we all have full-time jobs in addition to our director positions for NAGW. And at this time, I would like to present to you the 2018-2019 Board of Directors. Directors, as I call your name, please stand and be recognized. Treasurer and Midwest Director, Jason Huber. Secretary and East Region Director, Barbara Belli. Lakes Region Director, Debbie Dacey. Northeast Region Director, Katya Woick. Mountain Region Director, Paulette Neal Allen. South Region Director, Jennifer Chapman. West Region Director, Frankie Rios. At-Large Director, Greg Turnbull. And I'm Leslie Lebrecht. I'm the President and the At-Large Director. I want to also take this opportunity to thank all of our previous board of directors for all the hard work they put into the organization. We would not be here without you. Can any of our past board members stand up and be recognized? Anybody here? Matt, yeah! NAGW works with Celtic associations for association management, and they are the friendly voice you hear when you call the office. Deb and Denise are both here with us this week. And say hi to them when you see them at the registration desk. We also have several volunteers who assist during the conference, as well as judging the Pinnacle Awards, thanks to all of our past and present volunteers. All right, now I gotta turn my page here. We love our sponsors. They help to make the conference possible. Special thanks to Adobe, who sponsored the welcome reception last night. I hope everybody had a lot of fun. Please take some time to visit them at their booths right out along the halls out here. The sponsors will be giving away great prizes at the break on Thursday, and you'll need to register at their booths for a chance to win those. In your conference materials, you have a sponsor passport that the sponsors will stamp when you visit them. So make sure your name's on that, and we'll have a drawing on Thursday at lunch for a free conference admission to next year's conference. At this time, I'd like to invite Alicia Dvorak from Adobe up to the stage to say a few words, as they are our showcase, one of our showcase sponsors. Please give Alicia a warm NAGW welcome.
morning, everyone, and welcome to the conference. My name is Alicia Dvorak, and I represent Adobe here. We're thrilled to be a part of this conference and to be able to support, especially our own customers. Many of you I spoke with last night, and thank you for coming to the reception. I hope you enjoyed maybe the drinks or the food or both. And we're here to not only represent all of the Adobe products, obviously. So if you have any questions on anything from, any of the Creative Suite products to the Marketing Suite products, we're all here to support any questions you have. In addition to that, my primary focus here at the conference is to bring more awareness to the Cold Fusion platform. So many of you might remember that from earlier development days, but we're still developing that product. It's alive and thriving, and there's a lot of new functionality. There's a new API manager platform as well to help support that middle tier back on the back end. So come and meet us and say hi. I'll be floating around to all of the sessions as well. But enjoy your conference. Thank you.
Okay, so our keynote this morning, John Yablanski is an award-winning digital designer living in Detroit. His passion lies in exploring the intersection of interaction design and development, and he often merges these two disciplines into a hybrid approach for digital problem solving. He's currently working on the in-vehicle design systems team at General Motors and orchestrating design events as Director of Digital Experience for AIGA Detroit. When he's not building wireframes, prototypes, or style sheets, John is writing about his design experiences for outlets such as A List Apart, Smashing Magazine, and CSS Tricks. His work has been featured in outlets such as Fast Code Design, Adobe Blog, The State of UX in 2019 from UX Collective, and he's received awards from CSS Design Awards and the FWA. Please join me in welcoming John Yablanski.
Hi everyone, can you hear me? Yes. All right. I'm John Yablanski. I'm absolutely stoked to be here today. First time in Utah, and I'm excited to be joining you here today in this room. So, what I'm going to be talking about today is something I think is a critical kind of impasse that we're at as a tech industry as a whole. And this is basically ethical tech and privacy and data-aware technology, right? What I'm going to be honing in on today specifically is humane design patterns, and I'll talk a little bit more about what I mean by that here in a moment. But first, a little story about me. I decided to kind of take on something new last year. I decided to go from this web and app space that I'd always worked in as a designer and front-end developer and make a big transition. I saw a documentary on Netflix called Abstract. Many of you might be aware of this documentary. It's an excellent documentary. But the episode that stuck with me the most was actually this one with Ralph Gilles, who's actually the head of design at Fiat Chrysler Automobiles. And in this, Ralph really kind of honed in on this challenging space in automotive that's changing more in the last couple of years than it has in its entire history, right? So now we have electrification, we have autonomous technology, we have augmented reality and artificial intelligence. All of these things are coinciding in this interesting new space, and for a designer like me, it provided a lot of interesting challenges. So I decided to do something that I had never thought I would actually do and make the leap. I joined an automotive company. I started my tenure at General Motors last year in October, working on infotainment systems, much like what you see here for the Cadillac Q and things like that. So really, the premise here was building these kind of interactive experiences within the vehicle that had a lot of parallel with the work that I had done prior in the web and mobile space. But it was kind of different, right? It was very specific to this product, which was a vehicle, and there was different constraints and a lot of new and changing technology, but exciting altogether. One of the things that struck me the most about this space, though, that I wasn't really prepared for was this concept of driver distraction, which was kind of new for me as a designer, because coming from the web and mobile space, we don't really have a similar metric. We don't have a metric that says this is distractive technology we're putting out there in the world, right? Whether it's a website or mobile application that we're building, we don't check that against how distractive or disruptive it might be to the people using it. We check it for usability issues, accessibility issues. We work out bugs and maybe design pain points. But what we don't do is grade this on how the value it's providing to the human beings that use it. And this was kind of a profound realization for me. In the automotive space, there's a very good reason why distracted driving is taken seriously, right? We have to grade ourselves against everything we do based on how distractive it is for the people using it. And for good reason. Distracted driving deaths related to, in America, are basically on the rise. And it's a very serious concern. So everything that we do, we basically go back and say, is this distracting for the driver or for the other passengers? And if it is, we have to pull it out. We can't ship anything that potentially harms occupants of a vehicle. But what this made me realize is that we don't really have anything that's a direct correlation in consumer electronics, right? When we're shipping websites or app, we don't really take distraction seriously enough in the technology that we're actually building. And really, what we're doing is shipping products as a whole, and I'm not singling out any specific company or anything, but as a whole, as an industry, we're shipping things that are kind of competing for people's time and attention by and large, right? It's affecting the relationships we have with other human beings around us. And as an industry, again, as a whole, we seem to kind of celebrate how disruptive, how habit-forming, how addictive technology could be. You don't have to spend much time on the web and digging up articles. They're all over the place that really kind of celebrate, oh, such and such app is habit-forming and very addictive. And we almost paint these traits as positive traits, essentially, when in reality, they're not, right? They're negative by any other standard. And we've also kind of created these formulas. This is Nir Eyal's hook model, which really kind of, the goal of this being to make habitual behavior feel like natural behavior. And it's not, right? So he kind of celebrates this through this formula, beginning with an action. This might be a notification you get on your cell phone. It prompts you, or that triggers you to take an action, check that notification. You get a variable reward, and this goes back to behavioral psychology and Skinner's box, for example, the experiment with rats, you might be familiar. But basically, we crave these variable rewards. If they're different, it's like a slot machine. Every time you pull it, if you get a little bit something different on the other end of that, you're more likely to want to come back. You start to crave that, right? And then finally, you end the cycle with this investment. You upload your own photo, or you make a comment, and you're kind of completing this loop, right? You're drawing other people around you into this kind of addiction cycle in technology. And what this is essentially doing is creating this dopamine hit, right? It inspires us to take actions to meet our needs and desires. And it's triggered by this kind of social validation we get through likes and comments and things like that. The result is basically addiction to that. We want to come back to that. Our minds kind of crave that dopamine hit. And what we are essentially doing when that happens is that we're replacing our personal goals. I might have, the motivation to go to Facebook and check up on friends and family. But what I am that's being replaced gradually through company goals. Their goals to keep me on the site, looking at ads, scrolling through a feed. And the consequences of this we can see all around us every day. You don't have to go very far outside the doors to really see people just glued to their phone. In fact, in the automotive industry, we have this kind of joke where people can't even stop at a stoplight for long enough before they pull out their phone because they can't stand not to be entertained for the few seconds that the stoplight keeps them there. As an industry, I think we've really kind of moved really fast and broken a lot of things, right? And the truth of the matter is the research and the consequences and kind of, what's coming back in terms of the impact that this technology is having on people's lives, it hasn't really caught up with how fast it's moved, right? It's relatively still unknown. I think Mark Weiser, who is the CTO of Xerox PARC, said back in 1996, "The scarce resource of the 21st century will not be technology. It'll actually be our attention." And I think this is a prophetic statement from Mark, really, you know, because if you look around you, the most valuable commodity these days is really our time and attention. Most of the applications that people spend their time using and are somewhat addicted to are absolutely free. And really what the transaction there is your time and attention, essentially. You know, I think that when Netflix tweeted this, they were probably meant it as a joke. But it's a very telling joke, right? They're saying that HBO and YouTube and, you know, cable TV and all the other things out there aren't actually their competition, right? Their greatest enemy is a natural function of human beings, sleep, which I think is kind of, you know, alarming. And I think it really kind of highlights this fact that our attention and our time has become probably the most valuable commodity we own. The truth is, tech has led to a lot of problems. Shortened attention spans, increased anxiety and depression, sleep deprivation, distracted driving, social shallowness, constipation, skin irritation. I add these in here because, you know, it's funny, but at the same time, it starts to read like a medicine infomercial, right? That's kind of goes on and on to the point where it's kind of comical. And the truth is, we're seeing these effects all around us. The research is finally starting to kind of catch up too, right? So this is a report from, or a study, I should say, from the University of Pennsylvania, where they published the first experimental data linking decreased well-being to apps like Facebook and Snapchat and Instagram in young adults. They're making this correlation through research that it's actually having adverse effects on people. And last year, a letter signed by 50 psychologists was sent to the American Psychological Association accusing psychologists working in tech companies of using hidden manipulation techniques and asking the APA to really take a stand on this, take an ethical stand, specifically when it comes to children, right? Because we don't actually know all the effects. The children are still developing mentally. It'll take a long time before we actually understand the impacts that this technology is having on them. The truth is, design teams don't set out to create addictive technology. It's something that actually happens over time. You know, we'll basically start off, we're creating a website for a very specific need that's out there that we're aware of, or maybe you're creating an application that's setting out to solve a very specific human problem. You get funding, you grow, and then your kind of priorities start to shift a little bit, right? The human-centered goals that you're after become replaced with business-centered goals. And really, our premise becomes removing friction through the guise of user-friendly design. So to make the application or website better, we start to remove things that kind of slow people down, and in the process, they gradually get more and more addictive, and we start to kind of prioritize time on site and things like daily active users and things like that. And you're seeing these metrics all around us. And the truth is, we're kind of replacing the language of human-centered design with business language. Shareholder satisfaction becomes kind of the priority over the human value that an application or service actually provides people. And I think it's really time for us to center the benefits of technology around the value it provides humans, right? Aligning tech goals with the human goals. I think there's a few ways we can do this. One is to just wipe the slate clean, redefine what success looks like. It's no longer time on site, but more about meaningful interaction. The other way we can do this is the way a lot of industries have done this, regulation and certification, right? We regulate what can be done, and we certify those who can practice it. Not my favorite option, but it's a thing that a lot of people have done, a lot of industries have done to a lot of success, or varying degrees of success, I should say. And the last one I think is really kind of getting back to our roots, principle-guided design, really kind of internalizing from a design philosophy level, a technology level, what we are going to put out in the world as technologists. And that's actually one I want to focus on today, because I think this is the part where designers and developers can really have the most impact now, right? It's where we can focus our practice as technologists around principles that center on human value. One effective way to do this, from my experience, has been design principles, because they're awesome for a few reasons. They help align teams on shared values. And this is actually a big deal, because when a team aligns on the value system that we kind of hold up and have to grade everything against that we're putting out in the world, then we start to kind of align in terms of what's acceptable to ship. We also design principles help guide design decisions, right? So as a team, if we're aligned on a shared value system, it kind of starts to align, it helps guide what should be done here. You know, when a team is really kind of debating, I don't know if this is the best way to go, or maybe there's a different approach to this in terms of a UX pattern, or maybe it's even a development framework. Whatever it is, we can start to kind of align on design decisions based on these design principles. And lastly, it results in way more consistency. So if we're constantly kind of grading what's being done against these principles, the output is that much more consistent. So I began to kind of ask myself, thinking about driver distraction, thinking about addictive technology, I began thinking about what would design principles that actually align tech goals with human goals look like. And what I'm going to be sharing with you today is 7 principles that I think start to kind of encapsulate my thinking in terms of what that could look like. Now, I would encourage any team that's interested in kind of introducing similar principles to their own team and their own practice to undergo an exercise and really think about what value it is that you want to provide to the people using your products or services. But these are ones that I started to kind of identify, and the ones that I'll share with you today. We'll start with finite. Finite design maximizes the overall quality of time spent by bounding the experience and prioritizing meaningful and relevant content. Now, we've talked about this a little bit, but I think we've replaced every moment of waiting and boredom and otherwise non-entertaining activity with passive consumption on our devices. And the truth is that the applications and the websites that these devices allow us to have access to aren't really built with our kind of well-being in mind. They're infinite feeds that kind of can go on and on and on as long as we will let it. One way we can start to kind of counter that, I think, is to curb passive scrolling. Really provide a visual cue to users that informs them when they are kind of all caught up, when they've seen everything up until that point. It's a small visual cue that kind of slows people down, like a visual speed bump. And I think it's been interesting to see teams out there actually introducing this into their products. Instagram is actually the first that I know of. And I actually really like this feature because it's just a visual reminder that, hey, I've seen everything up to this point, and there's no need for me to continue scrolling if I don't want to. I can kind of, close the application. And it's that little kind of visual reminder that starts to help curb this passive scrolling behavior. The other way we can do this potentially is to introduce a load more. Now this might actually feel like a throwback pattern, right? This has been around for a really long time. And I think applications have kind of gradually replaced this with infinite feeds, right? Automatically loading content as the user scrolls. But if we start to kind of introduce these little speed bumps, what we can do is allow the user to basically implicitly, confirm that they want to continue consuming content. And yes, it's kind of like adding a little bit of friction to the experience, and as an industry as a whole, we've kind of moved to eliminate all friction that we possibly could, but I think it's these little patterns that just kind of help, create a more finite experience that keeps the user well-being a little bit more in mind. And regarding the load more, I think you're starting to see applications reintroduce this. So they would have went back to this kind of infinite scrolling pattern, and then they're starting to reintroduce these like older kind of patterns in terms of loading more content, and kind of forcing the user to kind of make a conscious decision to continue taking on viewing. The other thing I think we can do is really to just skip autoplay altogether, right? So autoplay really prevents users from making a conscious choice. And what I mean by this is like, if you're on Netflix and there's that counter that's happening, you've just finished a show and it's count and it's about to play the next show. Essentially, most people, or at least I know I don't really get up to change that, right? It just plays the next episode. And I've watched many a season of shows just because it was the path of least resistance. And I think the truth of the matter is that at the end of the day, yes, they removed friction and they allowed for me to do what I want to do, which is to continue to kind of I think you have to ask yourself, is that something that you're going to value the brand for at the end of the day? I know that I don't really feel great after watching a whole season of shows when I had plenty of other things I should be doing. And that starts to kind of negatively impact the brand itself, my kind of feelings on the brand. So I think a better alternative is really require an explicit action from people to kind of prevent this harmful binge watching. And the truth is, this is kind of like the opposite of what you'll see on a lot of applications like YouTube and Netflix, where they autoplay these videos, and it can kind of lead you down a wormhole of video consumption. All right, the next principle I want to talk about is respectful. Respectful design prioritizes people's time, attention, and overall digital well-being. We live in a world where attention is our most valuable commodity, and each day we're exposed to thousands of ads and notifications. This makes meaningful work, thought, and even interaction with other people very challenging. And it's the exact opposite of what I think we want technology to do, right? Technology should empower people, enhance their capabilities, not detract from them. Now, I think there's a few ways that we can introduce more respectful patterns in our practice that start to kind of, respect this time and attention of people. One could be that we align delivery with urgency. Not every notification is an urgent one, and we need to be kind of thoughtful about how we decide to deliver that notification, because it should really align with the importance and minimize distraction. That means in some cases just not delivering a notification at all, right? The other thing I think we can really do is, something we've always done but really doubling down on is allowing for customization and personalization. Allow users to customize with whom, when, and how they receive notifications to minimize unwanted interruptions. And there's a lot of really great applications that do this, right? Slack being one of them. It provides me easy to comprehend controls where I can just kind of quickly modify on the fly how I want to be notified, how often I want to be notified, and even on what device. I think the other thing we can really do is really start to adapt to the context of the user. So just as human beings kind of understand when someone's busy, when they're focused, and we don't interrupt that person, I think technology should actually adapt to the same social norms, right? Technology shouldn't interrupt us when it knows that we're trying to focus on a task or a goal. And it's been really great seeing, companies ship this even on an operating system level, right? So this is Focus Assist by Microsoft, and I think this is great because it does a few things. It enables people to work the way they want, stay connected with who they want to, catch up quickly once they're done focusing on whatever task they were focusing on, and then finally, it supports the goals of the human being using it. It kind of, basically meets that urge for technology to enhance human capability and help us achieve our goals as opposed to taking time away from us. The next principle I want to talk about is transparent. Transparent design is about clear intentions, honest in action, and free of dark patterns. So the amount of data being collected by apps these days is absolutely immense. And not all this data collection is absolutely necessary. In fact, we seldomly really know or even control how this data is going to be used and shared with, or who it's going to be shared with. And I think one thing we can do as technologists is really fight to kind of curb this a little bit with giving people the right to know what data is being collected. And even doing it up front before they even install an application that we've created, right? We need to make it clear and specific exactly what it is that they're signing up for. Now, not everybody really does a good job of this. I think Google Play does a decent job of this where they tell you up front before you've even installed an application, this is what it's going to have access to. The other thing I think we can really do is just be transparent about the data that is actually being collected, right? Communicate what data is being collected and why it's being collected at the time of collection. Now, there's varying degrees of success that you'll see of device makers and applications out there doing this. But I think one thing that's promising is iOS 13, which was recently announced by Apple at their WWDC Keynote. They really cracked down on location permissions, which is really about giving users that granular control on how often and when they want their location to be shared. They even kind of allow it to just happen at that one instance, right? Which I think is a significant move forward, because in the past we haven't had this level of granularity. They also introduced this concept of background locations and how often those can be stored through apps like Google Maps. So we can actually kind of revoke access to background locations over an amount of time. And this is really to kind of curb that, Google, for instance, kind of tracking all the places you've ever been, which if you've ever looked yourself up, you can through their settings, through your Google settings. And if you're using Gmail, it can kind of accurately pinpoint your entire habit map, everywhere you've been over a certain amount of time, and it's very alarming. So seeing this being introduced on an operating system level kind of puts more of that power back in the control of the people using these applications, and I think it's important. And it's great to see that this isn't just like an Apple thing. Android just announced Android 10, or I'm sorry, Google just announced Android 10, which really gives you this control over the location and how it's shared with other apps, whether you want it to be all the time or just while in use or never, right? It's this level of granularity that is what we need when it comes to data. Now, I think the other thing we can really do is start to think about access to data. So there's how, what data is going to be, exposed, and then when it's going to be collected, but what about once it's already collected? Some of the worst offenders in the past of this have actually come a long way, and I think it's a testament to how a little bit of pressure from us, right, can really start to curb this behavior and see some of these worst offenders starting to kind of introduce more control. So this is actually my ad preferences page via my Facebook account, and it gives me data on all the things that it's collecting on me based on how it's going to serve me up ads. And it even lets me edit this, which is significant. So I can start deleting things that they're collecting on me that aren't relevant, or delete all of them. The other thing I think is important that we do is consider what that offboarding process might look like. The offboarding process is just as important as the onboarding process. Users will appreciate this and more likely return in the future when they need to use your application or service. But what we need to do is really make it easy for people to delete their account if they want to. Don't hide the delete button. And I think it's kind of disheartening to see the reason why websites like justdelete.me exist in the first place is because companies, even big companies, have notoriously been making this very hard for people, right? So justdelete.me really lets people, get a direct link to where they can delete their account on all these services, and you can kind of filter it by how hard it is to find this content on their company websites. But I think it's kind of a telling fact that this exists in the first place, that teams don't really always kind of make that easy for people. The other thing I think is important to highlight here is that we're kind of in the midst of somewhat of an epidemic in terms of dark patterns. And if you're not familiar, dark patterns are really tricks used in websites and apps that make you do things that you didn't really mean to, like buying or signing up for something. And they're absolutely everywhere. In fact, recently, researchers from Princeton University and University of Chicago analyzed 11,000 shopping websites and identified over 1,800 instances of dark patterns, which I think is not really, it's alarming but not necessarily surprising, because you don't have to go very far to see dark patterns being used. I want to highlight probably the most diabolical dark pattern I've ever seen. This is a strand of hair, if you look closely, that appears to be on the screen, but this is actually baked into the ad on Instagram. And when you go to swipe the hair, you inadvertently click the ad and end up on the shopping site. Now, they're not all this bad. They're not all this bad. But, there's a lot of tricky ones here. Even just booking my flight to come here, I noticed that the call to actions to proceed with my booking my flight, there was visual kind of highlighting the upgrade button as opposed to moving forward with my basic ticket. And that's even on huge websites like Delta. So they're absolutely everywhere. The other thing I think we can do in terms of principles is really think about being more thoughtful. Thoughtful design uses friction to prevent abuse, protect privacy, and steer people toward healthier digital habits. I think, I mentioned friction earlier, but I think our race for this convenient future promised to us through science fiction has really become an obsession in the tech industry as a whole. And along the way to this kind of utopian future, we kind of lost something, right? In the race to avoid or remove all friction, we've lost something along the way. We've started to tie the value of technology to the revenue that it can generate as opposed to the benefit that it actually provides people. And I think there's a few things that we can really do to start to curb this, right? One would be to just require confirmation. Now, this is, you know, confirmation models, they're everywhere, right? But you'd be surprised. I'm sure everyone here remembers not too long ago the Hawaii missile crisis. And really, I think this is one of those things that just could have easily been avoided by just confirming, is this actually what you want to do, right? Just a little bit of a confirmation modal. Instead, they kicked off statewide panic, and we know the story. The other thing, and I should also mention that when it comes to confirmation modals, they don't have to all be very dry and that kind of thing. I think MailChimp does an absolute fantastic job at introducing these, but then kind of infusing some of their own brand personality into these confirmation modals. It's really these patterns that designers can use that introduce a little bit of friction to slow people down and require people to make a little bit of a more deliberate intention. The next one I want to talk about is algorithmic speed bumps. So these algorithms that are kind of collecting data on us and then kind of enacting that, they can kind of get out of control really quickly. You know, not too long ago, WhatsApp noticed that they were, because of messaging forwarding being unlimited, that they were amplifying, you know, they were able to amplify messages on the platform, people using it, and it led to riots, essentially. What WhatsApp realizes that if they introduced a little bit of friction and limited how many forwarding that messages could kind of take advantage of in a certain time period, they could actually curb that a little bit. And it's been great to also see, you know, brands like YouTube starting to introduce that also like on their creator platform. So they're tightening the rules that govern how channels can earn revenue through these videos by making it harder for spammers and extremists to really abuse the platform, right? So, and that's another example of just a little bit of friction that kind of slows people down and potentially helps to avoid harm. The other thing I think we can really do is to start to kind of embrace positive friction. Now, you know, Amazon Dash has recently been deprecated. Amazon's taking this away. But this is a great example of just, you know, removing friction to the point where it can almost be detrimental to people. Now, these auto-replenishment products like Dash, for example, are incredibly convenient, but they can also introduce a lot of problems for people that are, you know, for me, I have children, they click it 20 times, the next thing I know I have 20 boxes of Tide showing up, right? That's one issue, but then it starts to kind of curb into, you know, your spending habits and these things like this, and I question whether or not the removal of all friction is actually benefiting us. I should also mention that before Amazon deprecated this, took it out, it was banned in Germany because of consumer violation. The other thing I think we can do is really just start to encourage a little bit more moderation. And it's been great to see platforms like YouTube introducing this, right? So if a certain amount of time you've viewed their platform and you just want a little bit of a reminder that, hey, you've been on it for an hour and a half, is it time to take a break? These are just these thoughtful little features that get introduced that I think over time start to kind of add more to the brand equity. For me as a user, I love YouTube. It makes me value YouTube a little bit more because I see these kind of tools that they're enabling me to take advantage of that help me kind of keep my own digital habits a little bit more in check. All right, the next one I want to talk about is empowering. Empowering design ensures products center on the value they provide to people over the revenue it can generate. I mentioned earlier that, we've really started to kind of replace this language of design with this language of business. And I think that this is a systemic problem. It's actually it starts to dehumanize the people that we should be catering to, right? The end user. And I mentioned that technology should really empower people and enhance their abilities without disrupting their lives. Now, if you're kind of dehumanizing the user before you even ship a product, you're kind of, working against yourself there. So instead of talking about people as people, we call them users. We're using almost the language of addiction. We start talking about daily active users and weekly active users. And instead of their goals, we talk about our key performance indicators, right? Or our minimum viable product, or our measurable business result. And I think what we really should be doing is talking about what is meaningful interaction look like for the people using these products and services. One way we can do that is really to just give control, empower people with the control to really kind of manage the algorithms that are shaping their experiences. For example, only seeing posts from people you know. And it's interesting to see this kind of played out or introduced in the platforms again, some of the worst offenders of the past, but it's interesting to see these tools getting reintroduced into apps like Facebook, where they're really allowing you to kind of customize on a granular level who can see what you're putting out there on the internet. The other thing I think technologists can really do to empower people is to consider privacy and anonymity. We can do that by really kind of, sensible defaults, things like disabling pixel tracking, for example. Now, one app that actually came under a lot of scrutiny lately was an app called Superhuman, specifically in regards to pixel tracking. Which really allowed the people using this application to record read receipts, location, times it's been, an email has been opened, and even from what device. And this would mean that the people seeing this can see when, for example, you've opened an email, but you have no idea that this is actually happening. Now, that's regardless of the settings you have in your own email application. So people can see when you're reading their emails and even where you are in the world without you even knowing they're doing that. And in most cases, it's harmless, right? Relatively harmless. These are people sending business emails back and forth. But it doesn't take too much of a stretch of the imagination to see where this could head to be in becoming a harmful feature of an application. In fact, a feature like this probably should have never left the gate. The design team probably should have never even okayed this. Because there's tons of negative scenarios that could play out because of this feature. The other thing I think we can really do is to make technology invisible until it's needed. I think that empowering products really enhance our capability and sense of agency without disrupting our lives. And there's not many things that do that better than voice, right? Voice kind of hangs out in the background, and when we need it, we invoke it. It kind of also has the additional benefit of breaking our obsession with screen-based solutions. So this technology that's kind of more integrated in our lives and a little bit more out of the way, I think is a good place to head in terms of technology. Now, it's not to say that technology like Amazon's Alexa doesn't come with loads of issues in and of itself, like privacy concerns and whether or not it's listening to you all the time, but at least we're moving a little bit in the right direction. And I think the other thing we can do really is just promote awareness, usage patterns, right? We've never wanted to really be shackled to technology as human beings. We wanted to use it as a tool. And I think one thing that we can really do to start making people aware of their usage online is to make people aware of, through graphs and information, where they're spending their time. Now, this is one thing I'm happy to say is getting rolled out in a lot of operating systems right now. For example, Google's Digital Wellbeing Initiative, which introduced this into Android. I think this is absolutely amazing and a very positive step. And obviously, Apple doesn't want to be too far behind, so they follow up with screen time, which I'm quite a fan of. It really just kind of highlights where you're spending your time and even kind of compares that on a week-to-week basis. All right, the next principle I want to talk about is resilient. Resilient design focuses on the well-being of the most vulnerable and anticipates the potential for abuse. The simple fact is these platforms that are out there, really, they're ill-equipped to react when abuse does happen. And you know, just take, for example, the recent issues with Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg being in front of the Senate. It's really alarming because they weren't really capable of preventing abuse on their platform by the time it became a big problem. I really think that things like fake news and rampant harassment that's happening on their platform is really a direct result of designers not really considering the edge cases, the misuse cases. It's this kind of happy path thinking that we kind of go down as a team, and often it's as a result of being crunched for time, and you really need to get something out the door. But I think it's important that as an industry we really start to consider those edge cases, those scenarios that aren't most likely to happen very often, but when they do, they can snowball into something significant, like the scandals that were going on with Facebook recently. And I think there's a few ways that we can really start to do this. The first is to enable content control. Now, we touched on this a little bit, but it's really about enabling people to control when and how they're seeing other people are accessing what they're putting out there in the world. And I think this is a great example from Twitter, where you can start to kind of protect your tweets and kind of gate them to the people that you're connected with. The other thing I think we can do is to really enable this community moderation, right? Enable the ability to modify on an individual level. If I want to see content from this person, can they see content from me? It's this granular control that that enables people to kind of protect themselves a little bit more. And thankfully, these are also features that we've seen get introduced in the apps and services we're using, like Facebook, on a more granular level. So not only can I just block someone or report someone, but I can just kind of mute them for a while, which is also important. I mentioned edge case scenarios and misuse. I really think that the other thing we can do is focus on these, right? Put them at the center of our thinking. Plan for a breadth of scenarios. And that means thinking just beyond what a minimum viable product looks like. It's about kind of considering all the different paths that something might lead to, and then having a solution for that centers back on the value it's providing to the human beings using these services and apps. One example of this, I think, is something that Facebook's doing with their suicide prevention feature, where, Facebook's really there for us to connect us with friends and family out there, right? But they're taking advantage of the features that they have, the knowledge they have on us, and actually doing something that's kind of nice, right? So if they start to see people that are suffering from things like mental illness or things that start to look like suicidal thoughts, they can leverage technology in a positive way. They can use artificial intelligence to start seeing these patterns and provide help to those people at the time they need it, and meet them on the platform they're using while they're kind of experiencing these emotions. So this is a great example of technology kind of supporting us or being there in a positive way, even when we're at our most vulnerable. The other thing I'd like to highlight is about, really balancing data with research. There's a lot of great examples out there, and one thing I would like to say first is that, relying a lot on the data that we're sometimes fortunate to receive is great, right? Data allows us to make quick decisions and see patterns and really, ideally put design or technology out there that really considers the way people are actually using products. But I think, unfortunately, it doesn't really give us the entire picture. It doesn't tell us how it's impacting their lives on a personal level. And sometimes we need to kind of balance this data with, qualitative research. We need to get out there and talk to people and ask them and see how technology is impacting them in their lives. One example of this that I think is really effective is a feature that Facebook rolled out in India called the Profile Picture Guard. So it's really a safety feature to address concerns by women in India that bad actors could download their photos, use photos to stalk or harass them, threaten their families or personal safety, or do harm to their family's reputation. This is a serious concern there. And what Facebook found out is that if they offered people this ability to kind of guard or profile picture guard their image that's accessible to everyone else, it starts to kind of deter bad actors. So they prevent these images from being screenshot via the application, and it's just a level of protection for these women that is very valuable to them. All right, the last principle I want to talk about is inclusive. Inclusive design is a methodology that enables and draws on the full range of human diversity. I think, if you were to trace where technology kind of started from and where we are now in terms of technology, you could trace it back more or less to the industrial age, right? So it was initially fueled by this mechanization of production that replaced some types of human labor, right? And this was a big shift in the world kind of economy. Over many, many decades, this kind of gave rise to the information age, where human-computer interaction was really kind of the center of our touch point with technology, and complex interfaces that are still largely the product of a fixed set of choices were still determined by designers and engineers like us. Right? So you have a drop-down, your set of options is very specific to what we program will be available. But we're in this new age, this very new, interesting time, this digital age, where basically we can leverage things like artificial intelligence and machine learning and data to really start to shift this conversation in technology and how it's kind of evolving. It also means that we're at a very critical point too, because basically it can go in a very bad direction if we don't really have a vision for where it needs to go. And really what we need to be doing is considering or ensuring that technology we're building is inclusive and really mindful of all the diversity of human beings that are out there, right? All the people that might be using it, all those edge cases. And there's a few ways I think we can do this. One is that we can just start by building more diverse teams. It's pretty simple because homogeneous teams create narrow designs, and teams with more diverse experiences create more inclusive designs. Now, building teams is not the easy part for sure, but kind of, ensuring that you have that diversity of perspective and of mindset as part of your team is going to ensure that, the collective output is that much more inclusive. And it's really, really exciting to see a lot of tech companies coming around to this idea and really kind of celebrating this diversity and inclusion of their teams. I'm fortunate enough to have this at General Motors, and it's absolutely invaluable to have team members that suffer from disabilities that can actually be vocal during our critiques and reviews of our work and say, this is not going to work for me. And we kind of incorporate that into our thinking. We're able to catch things that much earlier. The other thing I think we can do is really to start to design for disabilities first. Shout out to all the parents in the room. I love closed captioning, and I know that closed captioning was not a feature invented for people like me, but I benefit from it all the time because I have young children, and noise wakes them up. But if I can consume the kind of content I want to consume and take advantage of this feature, closed captioning, it's really a great example of a feature that was put out there in the world to benefit a very select group of people with a disability, but it has this side effect of being able to kind of, provide value to a broad range of people, even people that don't suffer from that disability. And it's great to see, platforms that really center their content around video taking advantage of this and making it very easy to toggle on and off. And I think that's something that we need to continue to do anytime we're, using the interactive content like video. The other thing I think we can do is really kind of center back on giving control to people, making these accessibility settings that are so crucial to people with disabilities super easy to get to. Now, for a long time, the web has had very robust accessibility features, but on native devices like your smartphones and your tablets, the accessibility features haven't always been that great. And I think, as teams building applications and websites, we can really start to hone in and change that dialogue, really make these accessibility features super easy to get to. We don't want to disable things like zoom or contrast or font settings. We want to do things like enable the ability to turn off things like parallax scrolling and animation, infinite scrolling. These are all things that make web experiences or mobile experiences very engaging. But sometimes we don't consider those edge cases, those people with disabilities, how it might affect their kind of experience. And sometimes even prevent them downright from accessing your content altogether. I think Apple's a standout here because they do a really, really good job of just making accessibility features super easy to get to. And then once you're in there, very easy to comprehend and turn on and off. All right, so we've looked at the 7 principles, and I think there's a lot of work to be done. And principle-guided design obviously will not get us there alone, but I think it can contribute to this larger change as an industry that we need to kind of face head-on right now. As an industry, I mentioned, we've moved too fast to consider the impact technology's had and these things that we're building, how it's affecting people's lives. It's time to really slow down and be more intentional, right? We need to build this future that we want and use technology not as something that happens to us, but really something that we can choose to create, right? So it's really in our hands. I'd like to encourage everyone to kind of visit a website I created called Humane by Design. It collects all these principles, and if you're interested and any of these resonated with you, or you think they'll resonate with your teams, each one of these principles you can print out in a large format for absolutely free. Put them up on your walls, have discussions with your fellow designers and developers and technologists, and really let me know how those conversations go, what sparks, what comes up, and what your thoughts are. And you can follow this bit.ly link to download this presentation as well. Thank you. I think we have some time for questions if anyone.
All right, I got Okay.
Awesome, thank you. So have you considered a lot of what you're talking about here in regard to government? Because it's a unique audience with unique needs where people don't trust the government, don't like working with the government, even in a digital environment, and just want to get things done. I want to pay my property taxes, I want to pay a parking ticket, I want to see what's going on in my neighborhood, that's it. So how do you apply some of the things that you're talking about here to that government world where they're not engaging in the same way as social media or shopping or those kind of things?
Yeah. You know, I think that's a great question. And to be truthful, I think that people that are working and building tech for the, from the side of the government's perspective, they're somewhat at an advantage in that people are coming there to use it for a very specific reason. They're not always coming there to be entertained and that kind of thing. So there's this kind of like, if you can make things very purposeful, but introduce a little bit of that personality into the experience, so you're kind of enhancing it. Now, I think these principles are very relevant in that space because in the kind of move to do that, you can start to introduce things that you think would make a better user experience, right? So Facebook does this, or so-and-so does this, and it works for them, whether it's whatever it might be, right? Maybe it's a news feed or yeah. And I think that it's a slippery slope because you can start to introduce these anti-patterns that I think a lot of those platforms are, it's affecting them in a negative way. I think that there's going to be a sea change. My personal opinion is there's going to be a sea change where people start to demand the technology they're using be more like the government websites and services out there, where they're very purposeful, it does the one thing, and it does the one thing really well. And the one thing I would encourage you is really double down on that. But when you're doing that, really, don't forget how the kind of taking cues from broader consumer electronics, like websites and things, could steer you in a bad path, right? And these principles are very much, meant to kind of counter some of that. But I think it has implications in, features that could get introduced into a government website or app as well. Any more questions? Up here in the front.
So you have a family of your own. How do you apply these principles to their use of technology?
Yeah. I'm not I struggle just like any parent. Sometimes my kids have meltdowns and it's easy to just put a tablet in front of them, or when you're in a restaurant and you just want to have a nice dinner for a change, and I struggle with these as well. I think the important thing to consider is that, trying to curb that and show them an alternative. I'm lucky enough to have been part of maybe the last generation that remembered a time before technology being in every aspect of our lives, right? I still remember what that was like, and if I can introduce a little bit of that analog, kind of technology or mind frame into my daughter's lives, I think I've done a good job as a parent. And the truth of the matter is that technology is going to continue to steer them in this direction of depending on devices and things like that. As a parent, I just need to keep in mind that, if I can encourage moderation and encourage an alternative sometimes, but use technology in a way that empowers them and be cognizant of what technology they're reaching for, being purposeful, I think I've done a good job.
I just thought that was really good, so I thought I'd clap for it.
So now you're with GM, and what do you see happening in GM with respect to this type of mindful technology?
Yeah. That's an interesting question. I think that cars in general, vehicles, have always been very purposeful, right? So they've been kind of out of the way. They're in the garage when we don't need it, but when we need it, it gets us to point A and point B, right? And I think that if the auto industry, in all the changing that it's facing right now, keep that philosophy where it's kind of empowering people to get where they need to be, and do that without kind of distracting them and endangering them in the process. I think it's, you know, automakers can really kind of keep that, you know, that reputation for being kind of protectors of safety in a way.
I'm just kind of curious, how do you see the difference between the age groups and their paranoia or acceptance of like these dark tricks that are out there versus, you know, us who are like, oh, I'm not going to use Facebook anymore, it's taking too much stuff, so we just wipe it all together. Whereas my nieces and nephews are like, whatever, you're so paranoid, you're old, you know. So where do you see the difference and how that's really going to change what you're trying to do?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that, you know, really it's that kind of apathy that can be kind of a big issue. I think that the younger people, digital natives, if you will, that have never known anything outside of the apps and services that they're using, are at somewhat of a disadvantage in a lot of ways, because they haven't had a life experience that showed them that they're the bad sides of technology, right? And it's interesting to see parts of the world like Europe that are introducing privacy protection laws like the GDPR. They have a cultural history of you know, not entirely trusting businesses, not entirely trusting governments. And I think there you see kind of a different attitude toward it. I think it'll take time for, you know, a lot of you know, Americans to catch up with that, you know, particularly like the younger demographics. But like I said, I think the pendulum's swinging the other way, and you'll start to see kind of companies, I think, really starting to compete with each other for how ethically minded they can be. Now, I think the question is going to be, how do they reach those digital natives? How do they convince them that that's an important feature? You know, I don't have the answer. I can't see the future, but I can hope and pray that, you know, really they'll accept that as something that's in their best interest. To be honest with you.
Hey, excuse me, over here on this side of the room. So I noticed that Android 10 has started giving me messages that says when there's an app that has tried to access my location. Yeah. It says, do you want to turn this on? Do you want to let it continue to do this? It never really says, we at Google just finished crawling your email and we wanted to look at all the keywords in your email and advertise to you as a result of it. So in fact, that's kind of antithetical, right, to Google's business model. Right. So what's the alternative? How do we deal with this stuff? That is the million-dollar question. I think, you know, as an industry, we're propped up on, you know, ads couldn't really kind of fuel the growth that technology is experiencing right now. Ads alone, in the traditional sense, really couldn't do that. You know, pay-per-click wasn't working out. But what they could do is basically use artificial intelligence to know what you want and then serve you up ads that are contextual. That's their business models. Whoever you're talking about, that's what it is. That's what they're doing. I think if you were to rip that out from under them, we would see very interesting changes in technology as a whole. And you know, I don't really know what the alternative is, other than I think it starts with a demand from people like us, people that are buying these products saying we don't like this, and actively opting out of these services to force these bigger tech companies to really change their minds about how they're collecting data and what they're doing with it. It has to be a sea change.
I'm wondering if, from working at General Motors, you have any comments on the effect that autonomous vehicles, assuming it's successful, will have on these interfaces? Because if your car's driving for you and you don't have to spend your attention on driving, then, you know, if you have a long commute, if you're driving a lot, that's this whole market of uncaptured attention, and you can see companies like Tesla kind of positioning themselves with their dashboards. It seems like they've moved away from analog and they just have these massive screens. And so they're kind of positioning themselves to capture your attention. And it seems like in a way that might kind of slide back to a lot of these dark design patterns and kind of bad things that the web industry is responsible for, I guess. So I'm wondering if you have an inside perspective and comments on how we can avoid that, or if auto manufacturers are kind of making steps to avoid that.
Yeah. Another great question. I think that, you know, the introduction of autonomous technology into vehicles is going to absolutely change mobility as we know it. And it's exciting for technologists, like designer like myself. It's why I kind of got involved in that work. I can't really speak for like GM's position on this or anything like that, but I can say that you know, I agree with you. I think that if now is the time to really kind of infuse where we want this to go. Is it going to be technology that helps enable people to be more productive, to spend more time with their family? Is it giving them more time back? Or is it just further extracting it, and now the vehicle is just another platform for doing that? And I think people like myself that are working in the industry, it's absolutely our goal to avoid that at all costs. So, you know, thinking about principles like this is an important first step, but there's a lot more that needs to be done. And another sea change, because we're at a fork in the road. So I think that really, yeah, the onus is on us right now. Any other questions?
Raise your hand up really high so I can see you.
Getting a workout.
That's all right, I need the steps. Okay, now that I'm closer, raise your hand again. Okay.
Thank you for coming all that way. So I really understand and appreciate the principles by design. I feel like that's government's place, is to try to be responsible with our information. So it really fits naturally with what we do. But we also have, I guess, a contrasting principle of we're supposed to be providing measurement. We're supposed to be, you know, providing numbers, especially with all of our digital work, to prove that we are reaching people, to prove that we're getting the word out.
Yeah.
So how do we balance that with, hey, we want to have, you know, because right now it's like, how many people have visited, how long were they there,
yeah.
How many likes did you get, how many interactions, how long was it, and there's this, you know, request for that kind of data, and that proves your success. But are you also doing principled design? Are you giving people what they need quickly? And so how would you say we should balance that?
Yeah, I mean, this goes back to kind of what I talked about, balancing, you know, quantitative data with qualitative research, right? So, I mean, and this is actually, to your question, I think this is could be a slippery slope, because the minute you start to kind of over-optimize for that data, clicks, time on site, or the, you know, whatever it might be, these metrics that are really grounded in pure data, you start to lose sense of that metric of like, how's it actually impacting people's lives? Go talk to them, and they say, yeah, it's kind of a headache, you know. Yeah, I'm doing it, I'm doing the thing, but it's taking me twice as long as I think it should, you know. So I think, you know, just being cognizant of the missteps, the illusion that data gives you, by countering that with with research, qualitative research. It's a great question, though. Yeah.
Come on, you have another chance to make me jog all over the room. And get some of John's wonderful insights.
It's this side of the room's turn, so.
Oh, I guess we're done.
No, we have one.
We have one more? So you gotta stick your hand way up in the air and like jump up and down.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm just interested to know, so as a web user, every site wants to send me notifications now,
Yeah.
which is something that started happening, I guess, a year or 2 years ago. How do you feel about that?
I mean, I think that I mentioned, you know, our time and attention being a valuable commodity. I think notifications is probably one of the worst offenders of that kind of interruptive kind of trigger to pull us back in. And I don't feel very good about that. Yeah. I think, you know, as designers and, you know, developers, I think it really comes back to what I mentioned, just considering the, you know, how technology can kind of adapt to social norms. So, you know, if I see you or you're doing something or you're in the middle of something that, you know, you don't want to be disrupted or interrupted, like driving or focusing on writing or something, I think technology really needs to kind of adapt to those social norms and behave the way a human being would behave, to be honest with you.
Hi, thanks. Could you spend a little more time, you said earlier, on the doubling down the government could do with the services and the products that they're putting out? Because, you know, for example, we have our website that we drive almost everything to. Our social media serves to drive back to the website. We have apps there people can download that can be used, but we're not really permitted to collect a whole lot of data from the user, except to say maybe their region. That's how general we have to stay.
Yeah.
But just, you know, other ways in which we can be very targeted with these things in mind and yet still be providing the value to the end user and still kind of justifying our existence, because of course management wants to know how much people are interacting with us.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great question. You know, it all starts with really, you know, the classic kind of design research, asking or figuring out exactly what people need to do and what the potential pain points of you know, processes in the past might have been, and try to mitigate that. You know, and I understand, like, sending back to social channels, it could be, there's a lot of advantages to that, but I can guarantee you they're collecting all the data that you cannot collect. And so you know, the question becomes, you know, do you want to send people to those platforms and kind of send them down that potential wormhole of going through their feeds on social platforms, or is it actually providing a value? That's what it comes down to, is saying, well, if there's a you know, a value that's being provided at the end of the day, then you know, you're moving in the right direction. And I think an important thing to do is consider, you know, I've heard a lot of, and this is exciting to hear about how government websites and apps the teams are getting, they're getting kind of supported, and they're doing a lot of things, a lot more so than they would have in the past. But the important thing is to keep the great thing about, I think, government websites and services being very singly focused on one task. I think the broader consumer technology landscape has gotten kind of carried away with features, and it can do all these things, and we've forgotten how powerful a website or an application that does one thing but does it really, really well, how valuable that is. And it's an increasingly rare thing. So you guys keep doing that, and that's what I meant by doubling down.
Any cool stuff you've been working on with cars?
Hang on, Frankie, nobody heard you.
I just asked in general, any kind of cool stuff you've been working on in GM with cars and all that.
Yes.
Anything that you... Doesn't have to be a secret or anything like that, but like, what's your favorite part about that?
You know,
awesome.
I think what's really interesting is just being part of a company that has such a legacy and heritage. You know, they've been around for a really long time, and seeing that culture of engineering, having the chance to mature in ways that you don't really see in Silicon Valley, I think that's been really interesting. And I think, you know, we're at an interesting time where, you know, the center, the epicenter of technology is kind of moving from these older kind of centers of technology to Silicon Valley, and now they're kind of coming back in a lot of ways to the places that they originated from. And so I think that that's really interesting to see that dynamic. I want to see more of that personally, and I think being in Detroit, it's kind of exciting to be part of a little bit of a check and balance against Silicon Valley in a lot of ways. All right, any more questions? Thank you.
Thank you, John. All right, so we have a little bit of time before general sessions start at 10:45, so go visit the sponsors and have them stamp your passport. Go forth in conference, thanks.